I wanted to tell you about, well, this. Yes, that's right. The pro-Palestinian, Jew-hating, Hamas-loving protesters are back at Columbia University in New York City, disrupting students and vandalizing property. According to the New York Post, dozens of masked protesters stormed the library this week, chanting all the usual nonsense. But unlike last year when this happened, well, things have changed. Have a look at this. Yes, this time authorities took control. They barricaded the protesters inside the library and only let them out when they provided campus ID, proving they were allowed to be on the campus. The rest of them, the outside agitators, were arrested. And Secretary of State Marco Rubio says that if they're in the U.S. on any sort of visa, they are getting the boot. And I say good because, you know what? That stuff we just saw there, that's not free speech. That's not the discussion of ideas. It's disruption. It's vandalism and wrecking the education of people who pay $100,000 a year for the privilege. I say good on the authorities there, good on Rubio, and what an amazing change from the Biden era when this sort of stuff was allowed to run, quite literally, riot. Well, let's bring in my next guest here, former Trump senior advisor Christian Whiton. Christian, thanks for coming back here on the U.S. Report. I just spoke about the terrible scenes at Columbia this week. Tell us more about this. Why are these protests happening again?
Yeah, it's really almost like a religion. You mentioned earlier the civic religion of that you see with pride flags, which really don't represent anyone but just sort of the collection of lunatics. But you're really running into this core ideology. And Columbia and other so-called elite institutions are realizing it's going to take more than just protecting Jewish students, which certainly they ought to do, really. But over the years, they have cultivated a student body and a collection not just of left-wing professors, which we've known have leaned left really since the 1960s, but this army, this cadre of administrators, of provosts and vice provosts and deans and assistant deans, and this incredibly large body of people who are just anti-American. And the thing that they're latching on to now is support for Hamas. But, you know, the next month it might be some different flavor of the month, but it's just this ingrained dislike, hatred really of our society that you're seeing is very hard to repress because it's been cultivated for so long.
It's absolutely right. It's the politics of negation is what I always say. Hey, I want to ask you also, Christian, here. Fascinating story just broke a few hours ago out of the U.S. It has been reported that President Donald Trump, now who the left always paints as the president for the rich and the billionaires, well, he's apparently reportedly considering a new higher top tax bracket on Americans who earn more than $2.5 million a year. Christian, this is going to confuse the hell out of Bernie Sanders, but it does seem to be keeping with his populist push to rebalance things towards the middle and working class after the rich got so wealthy during the age of globalization and cheap money.
You're right. It's not set in stone yet either, but you're seeing actually something that's just below the surface, but a fight within MAGA, within the America First, within the new right, if you will, over how far to take economic nationalism. You see people who make a whole lot of money but pay lower tax rates than, you know, plumbers, than teachers, than people who do ordinary jobs, who have to pay a payroll tax and an income tax, and yet rich guys can pay something called carried interest, where their investments, they make potentially millions, hundreds of millions, and pay less. You're also seeing in this administration the absence of people like Larry Kudlow, who has a great show on Fox Business, but who's not sitting there in the White House, who would argue that, wait a second, if you raise taxes on that top bracket, you're not just getting rich guys who are driving Bentleys to go out and buy Fabergé eggs. You're actually also getting small businesses. An enormous number of small businesses in the United States actually pull their taxes onto a personal income tax return and pay that. So not a done deal yet, but a real fight on the new right.
Yeah, it's absolutely fascinating. And I think, just that rebalancing of things, though, as you say, that is going to be the fight for the future here. Now, also, though, we do have to go back to the past because President Biden, former President Joe Biden, remember him? He sat down this week for his first interview since leaving the White House, and he had nothing kind to say about President Trump. Have a look.
When I left office, we had created more jobs than any president in history of the United States in one term. Our economy was roaring. We were moving in a direction where the stock market was way up.
So he says his 100 days is a triumph. What does President Biden say about Trump's first 100 days?
I'll let history judge that. I don't see anything that was triumphant.
Look, on one level, I'm amazed that he even did the interview at all, but he's just reciting the old talking points that post-COVID economic surge he had something to do with.
Right, and you should note that interview occurred on government-funded broadcasting, PBS here in the U.S., and that's a perfect place for it. The jobs that were created by Biden, to the extent he created any, there was the springback from the COVID low. That was good, but the ones he created with $2 trillion in annual deficit spending were either government or government adjacent. Those are the ones that Trump is cutting back, and why? You see some surveys of negative economic sentiment in America, but actual average Americans aren't feeling it because they don't work for the IRS or HHS or the alphabet soup of agencies in Washington that actually are facing some very modest cutbacks. And this is why Trump actually has the confidence to do what he's doing in trade with China and in waiting for tax cuts with the Republican Congress, because he actually isn't feeling a lot of pressure, because average Americans are not feeling economic pressure, at least not yet.
That's right. Hey, Chris, before I let you go, I've got to ask you about this story, which I thought was fascinating here, and I think it is definitely a triumph of President Trump, is his war on DEI, because it gives me great pleasure to share with you this news from the Washington Post that DEI in workplaces looks like it's dying a slow and painful death. A company has gone through all of the diversity statistics and mentions in annual reports and all of that. And, well, it turns out that companies are simply not even talking about this anymore. And talking about their qualitative measures of board diversity. What do you make of this? Is this a big win for Donald Trump against the whole DEI edifice?
I think it is. It's the beginning of one. It's something he made clear from the beginning of his administration across government, firing people or discontinuing their contracts. And a lot of people were on government contracts to be DEI bullies. We saw a spontaneous movement, literally, that came out of nowhere in the United States that killed Bud Light as the most popular beer in the United States because they sided, not even with a transgender someone, just a man who decided to start dressing like a woman. And I think you're going to see more of it. Now, the question is, these people are down, but they're not out. They're hiding in the bushes, and we have to see if it really sticks. But corporations really should focus on what they do. And if there's a government policy, if you're Delta Airlines and the government's going to raise tax on jet fuel, yeah, you can get into politics. But you shouldn't be talking about transgenderism and about things that have nothing to do with your business. And that's what DEI had become. This is a shift back, hopefully, to a meritocracy.
Exactly right. Hey, finally, look, I just want to ask you quickly about U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, who's going to meet with Chinese officials this week in Geneva. Now, President Trump has said he is not going to consider dropping those 145% tariffs on Chinese goods. And I'm starting to see reports out of China that their factories are having trouble. There are protests, unpaid wages. This is going to start to bite on China pretty soon, won't it?
I think so. And again, you're not seeing pressure in the United States. You're not seeing any of the inflation that people have warned about. But China is under pressure. There are reports of ships. Oh, and incidentally, China did a great thing today. Instead of reporting bad economic news, they just decided to stop releasing economic indicators and news. Fantastic. It's always going to be good. But it's the A-team. It's Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, and also the U.S. Trade Representative, Jameson Greer, going to meet with the Chinese. This is just the beginning. I think Wall Street thinks we're going to get a quick deal here. But the amount of fundamental change that would have to occur in China is big. And in the meantime, you saw Trump get a trade deal with the UK. I think Australia could be early up there. It's like the UK. Australia has a trade, actually, the US has a trade surplus with Australia. Japan, other deals are going to be in line. So China's going to start to feel left out and feel pressured here.